Welcome to the Vocal Freedom Podcast. I'm your host, Lee Martin Thomas. Join me and my guest speakers as we discuss their journey with their voice and how they use it to support their passions and professions in media, education, and the performing arts. My guest this week is clinical voice disorder expert, speech and language therapist, Sue Jones, who I'm thrilled to connect with at a pivotal moment in her life, as only last month, after enjoying a very fulfilling career, has now fully retired after a whopping 38 years service at Wythenshawe Hospital. Throughout her career, Sue has been instrumental in developing voice clinic services, as well as developing standards of competency at all professional levels, from student to expert practitioner. She's used to leading teams of voice specialists who perform, interpret and teach laryngeal endoscopy, otherwise known as taking a good look inside people's throats with specialist cameras and equipment, to assist with understanding and diagnosing a whole variety of speech, voice and swallowing disorders. I was fortunate enough to hear Sue talking about her work when she was teaching on a vocal rehabilitation training course I attended in 2017, which was a couple of months after I read her brilliant book, Laryngeal Endoscopy and Voice Therapy, a Clinical Guide, which covers the developing role of the voice therapist, how voice clinics work, what different clinic types offer, the assessment protocol for spoken and singing voices, along with vocal therapy techniques. Sue has a particular interest in the performing voice, and through her skills working with professional singers from the classical world, music theatre and rock and pop, a specialist performers voice clinic service was established at University Hospital, South Manchester. Sue has lectured nationally and internationally and has been an integral cog in bridging the divide between the ENT, the SLT, the voice teacher and patient, which has led to the slow development of more multi-disciplinary voice clinics suitable for voice professionals. I'm sure her voice and experience will continue to be highly valued within the voice community. And it's a joy to share this time with you, Sue. Thank you again for taking the time to join me today. I'd love to start by just asking you how you are enjoying your next chapter so far.
It's all a bit strange, obviously, because of the COVID situation, but I have to admit, I've been retired about 3 weeks now, I think, and I've loved every minute of it. So, yeah, more relaxing, slower pace of life. I've got lots of things to do, lots of things booked in over the coming sort of few months. 6 months, 12 months or so on. So yeah, all is good.
It's an exciting time, I think, isn't it? I just feel like it's a chance for you to spread your wings a bit more and do more with your research.
I shall. I'm kind of having a break from everything just to start off with. I have got an honorary consultant post back at the hospital, and I will go back and do some teaching and be involved in some projects. And I know they're quite keen to get me involved when we do some more educational work as time allows, and the facilities are there for either Zoom meetings or, even better, probably in the end, face-to-face conferences and courses, which we all want to get back to in the end. So do some of that. So yeah, I'm very much looking forward to getting back into that, but I am giving myself a bit of a break currently.
I think you deserve one. I mean, 38 years is an amazing an amount of work, and I imagine so much must have changed in that time in terms of the the technology that you're using now and the equipment. I mean,
well, yeah, when I first started, it was a long time ago, but when I got my first job at Wythenshawe Hospital in 1982. And when I kind of went as a generalist therapist. I was seeing pretty much everything, including some children at the time, but, that wasn't for very long. But what was quite good is that there was a lady who was specialising in voice work, but she, even though, in fact, her family had all completely grown up and she was very near retirement age, she only worked term time. So come the holidays, the Easter holidays, the Christmas or whatever, and summer, she just handed her whole voice caseload over to me. Ooh. So I just got to see them for short periods of time. But then when she came back, I had to hand them back. So I really developed my interest from there, I think, and I became quite fascinated with this group. But then after 18 months, she actually retired completely. So I said, I was really interested. And then it's her voice caseload. It was tiny compared to what we do now. But at the time, it was all that was available. So I took on the caseload, all the caseload of voice patients. But you're right, things were very, very different. It was a much slower pace of work all those years ago than it is now. And I actually was very fortunate to have a lot of opportunities to sit in on general ENT clinics and observe the ENT consultants. Now, again, it was very different because there was, or at least in the hospital I was working in, nobody was using fibre optic scopes. So it was a question of like standing relatively close as you felt comfortable with, looking over the shoulder at a consultant, forming an indirect examination of the larynx with a mirror. So you used to warm the mirror and then put a tongue depressor on the tongue, put the mirror at the back, and he kind of had to stand there and say, yes, I can see what, can you see this? Can you see that? And half the time, I'm going to be honest, I couldn't actually see anything. But I did learn an enormous amount about general ENT as well as the larynx. So it was an extremely good time from the perspective of learning. There were very few, however, textbooks.
Yes.
Back in the 1980s, no voice textbooks at all. So it was very much intuition as far as I was concerned in treating the patients. Having said that, they did tend to get better. So I suppose I must have been doing something reasonably right.
Yes.
And I really, really enjoyed the work. It wasn't until probably the early 90s, 1993, I actually got the job of managing the services between Withington and Wythenshawe hospitals. Withington was actually a bigger hospital at the time. And I was the overall manager of both and doing some voice work over there. So I started attending what was an already sort of established joint voice clinic over at Withington. And there, the laryngologist, who subsequently became my husband, was using fibre optic scopes to examine the larynx. And he was really keen for me to observe the larynx through these scopes. Not only that, he was also very keen for me to pass the scope myself. Now, I was really dead against this. I mean, really, I can't do that. We speech and language therapists don't pass scopes. It's an invasive procedure, you know. And I was really dead against it. But I was persuaded, should we put it that way. And you could only get so much info, or very little information, from the mirror examination, but from the fibre optic examination, you could really get a lot. And I think that was probably one of my light bulb moments. I began to say, actually, I can see an awful lot more. And I learned so much from just looking at those examinations and not really, to be honest, at the time, understanding how the voice was produced, not in the same way that we understand it now. So, yeah, it was very, very different then.
Yes, amazing. I almost want to go back and look up some vintage equipment because, you know, there are some of the older books on my shelf that you go, wow.
Absolutely. In all the older textbooks, you will see all those pictures. Absolutely.
One of the questions I ask everybody at the beginning of the podcast is, how would you describe the journey with your voice? And so sort of pre-training, going into speech and language therapy, you were a singer. What led you down the sort of therapeutic path?
Well, when I was at school, I did music A-levels. I did French and English as well. I did music A-level, and I'd always thoroughly enjoyed doing the music side of things. I played the guitar, played the clarinet. I'm not saying I played them well, but I did play them. And in actual fact, for my A-level music, I did sing. And I was in all the choirs that you could be at school. I also conducted and led the first year choir when I got to probably the fifth form, something like that. And I also was part of a Christian singing group, which I led and played the guitar for, and in those days, wrote songs for as well. Wow. So I was very interested in music, but I was never really going to be a performer. I don't think I would ever have had the confidence to be a performer. And I remember, I guess the very way I got into speech therapy was that I was looking up in a book, because there was no internet in those days, what you could do with various qualifications you'd got. And I looked at what you could do with music A-level, and one of the things it suggested was speech therapy, and I'd never heard of it. I looked in a bit more detail and found out and went and observed some clinics, both working with children and with adults, and thought, actually, I'm really keen on this. I didn't know very much about the voice side of it there. I just knew I wanted to work in that side of things. And I think I'd always probably liked the rehabilitation side of things. So yeah, it came from a musical background from that perspective. And then it wasn't until I did the whole course. And then when I went into the course, I thought I wanted to work with children. By the time I finished the course, I knew I wanted to work with adults. Okay. But it wasn't until really, I got into Wythenshawe and again, took over this voice caseload that passion for voice really started to grow. And it was from very early on in my career.
I mean, the way I look at voice, and I'm sure you must you've seen thousands of larynxes over your career. But I do have a sense, obviously, that high-level performers are sort of, I would consider, vocal athletes.
Yes.
Does that make sense? In terms
Absolutely.
of their musculature has to be completely finely honed and understood and played at its best to be at that level. I can understand that. So I also really interested, though, in how people's voices can break down, not so much in the professional field, but in general life, and how that affects a person. So I imagine you've got lots of experience in that field too, helping people that have gone through voice disorders more from perhaps emotional tangles and things. Does that come into your work?
Yeah, I don't think I've ever come across any patient who hasn't been affected emotionally by their voice problem, either to a greater or lesser extent. Yes, you do tend to see it more in vocal athletes because it affects their whole lifestyle, their income, everything. But every single person who's had a problem with their voice I've ever worked with or has clearly had an emotional reaction to it as well. I mean, sometimes it's the emotion and the stress or anxiety that might start the problem off. But even if that's not the case and it's due to something else, then they are affected because, I mean, we've probably all heard it said a million times, your voice is you. We listen when we pick up the telephone and we hear the person on the other end, we know who it is. And it's such an individual thing that if that goes, it changes you as an individual as well. And particularly if you lose your voice altogether, so you can't communicate at all. And it affects the way people treat you, but also your family can affect the different ways people respond to you. So yeah, the emotional side of working with people, it can be quite stressful because people do get very upset when their voices change. And that's probably one of the really nice things about when you can, getting the voice to come back to normal, because it gives them, I suppose, a sense of relief in some ways.
Yes, I think that makes complete sense. And coming back to yourself, if you've had if you've completely recovered from perhaps a vocal injury or a style of using your voice that needed to be sort of therapied away. Sometimes people just don't realise, do they, that their habits can be damaging.
Oh, yes. And I think one of the first things we always try to do, whoever we see in therapy, is to talk about voice care and advice, because people don't know. I mean, nobody's taught. Even teachers, they used to sort of have on teaching courses when people were being taught to teach. They used to get some vocal training on some of the courses, but as that seems to have dwindled over the years, and now nobody seems to get any training on how to use your voice. And yet so many people need to use it for their work. Yeah,
I think there are some great teachers I'm aware of, some I've had on the podcast who, for example, Janet Shell, she does training for school teachers that need to speak over the class to make sure that they know how to support their voices correctly and things. So that's really helpful. There's quite a few services out there. I wondered if you had any insight about the fear and insecurity that can bring the person, the loss of quality of life and the anxiety, and how the work that's done in the sort of multidisciplinary team can help to coach that person back to wellness.
I think the words multidisciplinary team are absolutely crucial in those words, because it depends on the type of injury. Certainly people we've had with lesions of some form or another, maybe they've needed surgery at some point. It's a question of timing a lot of the time, because you do have to work around them, because do have commitments, and sometimes you have to manage things as best you can, and then they go on and do whatever their commitment is. Maybe that might be a cruise ship tour or a musical or something, whatever it is that they're doing, and you have to time it all quite carefully so that it fits around their commitments as well, as best you possibly can. And we quite often work on the basis of give them as much therapy and as much ability to manage their own voice as well as they can. And then we time the surgery at an appropriate point. And that's where I think it is essential that clearly the MDT is an important part of managing particularly high level performance. But I think there's another aspect to it, which is about confidence. And I think when performers run into problems, they very often lose a lot of confidence. And therefore, they're a little bit tentative about trying things. And sometimes it can be enough to say, actually, it's all fine down there. Your technique's really good, but you've clearly lost confidence. And that's when we send them in the direction of the singing teacher.
Yes, yeah.
That can sometimes be enough. Sometimes they need a little bit more than that, sort of maybe a little bit of therapy to sort of bring them to the level where they're ready to go back to the singing teacher. But of course, what happens when they lose confidence is they stop singing and then become under-conditioned and all those sorts of things. And I think, actually, with relation to the last year in COVID, that's happened a lot, before I finished, we saw quite a lot of singers who just hadn't been singing because there hadn't been the work available for them. Yeah. And so they haven't been practicing in the same way. And then they feel they can't do what they did before. Sometimes we can be there to reassure them as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's very much what I've seen working and sitting in with other speech language therapists. There is an element of, therapy to it. But do you know what I mean, though? That caring element, that really understanding and listening to the person in front of you. And I suppose what I imagine things may have been like 40 years ago, because of what we didn't know about the voice then, because of the work that hadn't been done, the research that hadn't been done, that people weren't perhaps taken as seriously going to the doctor with a voice issue.
I think there's two aspects to it. I mean, first of all, we didn't understand how the voice worked in the same way, which we learned an enormous amount. I mean, certainly in the 1990s, there were a plethora of books that came out. I mean, just one book after book after book. But there were also a huge number of courses in conferences nationally, internationally, which I went on as many as I possibly could manage. And there were some great people then who really started to develop our sorts of ideas. In particular, I remember we went on a course in Lyon, the ENT surgeon, nutrition, Mark Bouchard and Guy Cornet. They were just brilliant, and they opened my eyes so much on the microstructure of the vocal fold and surgery and delicate surgery and how it was done and all that sort of thing. And then there was challenges on the evidence base, largely from Janet Wilson, Paul Cardigan in Newcastle, and on the therapeutic side from Christina Schulen, just opening our eyes, I think, and developing knowledge. And I think all that development of knowledge has made us better, able to understand, I think, a bit more not just how the voice is produced, but when we started doing the endoscopy stuff, which we were talking about earlier on, and we were actually looking at muscle patterns and muscle tension, I think that enabled us to develop better therapeutic techniques. That really took off in the 1990s. Yeah. I mean, there was obviously ourselves, there were the Lewisham team, and there was the Newcastle team, to name just three. But I think we were probably the three earliest innovators of the disciplinary teamwork, and that's still, in my view, the best. That's the gold standard. That's the best it should be. Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely true. So regarding others' voices, I'd love to ask you what kind of voices that you're drawn towards, what you like listening to music-wise. Who would you never tire of listening to? I'm a big fan of musical theatre. Massive fan. I mean, I think my favourite probably is Wicked. Well, no, definitely is Wicked. And Les Mis, I just love musical theatre. But rather than having individual artists, there are some artists that I do like. I'm a big fan of country music. I love Carrie Underwood, for example. She's a great singer. I'm also, it goes back a bit, but I'm a huge fan of ABBA. But sometimes it's individual songs that bring back memories rather than necessarily an individual artist. So one that always kind of it gives me goosebumps is Ultravox's Vienna. That was from the early 80s, but that was kind of a particular time in my life, a lot of change was going on. But that, I think sometimes, it's individual songs like that. And then we went, can't have been last year, it must have been the year before, we went to see a singer which I'd never really heard of, Rhiannon Giddens. Just been on the radio, I think, just recently, and I think she might have released something recently. But I must admit, I didn't know very much about her. So we went and saw her, just in a fairly small, it was at the Opera House at Buxton, it was a fairly small place. And she was just brilliant. So it's nice to try new things. It's like the soundtrack to your life, isn't it? You sort of have certain periods of music for your 20s, 30s, 40s and all sorts, I'm sure. Yeah, I can relate to this. I'm getting on myself. You're doing something really well, though, Sue, because I have to say, having just seen celebrations for your 60th birthday, I couldn't believe that, because when we met, I thought we were about the same age. And I'm 46 this year. So there you go. I would have thought, put you in your 40s, love. Totally. I think I still feel 25 inside, despite the fact that my eldest son is 33. I think it's you don't really age in your head in the same way that you age in your body. I suppose another question I'm intrigued to just sort of ask you in this moment is more to do with, like, when you hear voices, are you listening to them in a sort of analytical way, or can you completely separate yourself? Because as a voice teacher, I sometimes have to stop myself trying to sort of 3D landscape what I'm hearing. Do you know what I mean by that? Yes, I know I can't separate it. And yes, I do constantly analyse voices all the time. So it's like I don't think I'll ever be able to get away from that. Both spoken voice and singing voice, I
And sometimes I sit there and thinking, probably more with the singing voice than anything else. And I'm imagining what's going on inside, which is quite sad, really. But yeah, I kind of think, oh yeah, and I bet that's happening. And oh yeah, I can see the larynx raising there. Yeah, I can't. I've also spent a lot of time with the spoken voice over the years. One of the other areas I've done a lot of work on is perceptual analysis of the spoken voice.
Oh, lovely.
So using a perceptual analysis scheme that was originally developed by a Japanese guy. We started work on it in this country in about 2004, and I led up a group where we would collect voices that were disordered, and then a consensus panel of us would sort of sit down, analyse them according to this scheme. So ever since then, I can't listen to a voice at all without analysing it according to this scheme. And yeah, it's the same with singing. Occupational hazard.
It's amazing how subtle changes in the body can affect the voice. I'm noticing that more and more and more, and how people carry themselves. So I'd like to ask you, what do you think is the most valuable thing any person should know about in terms of taking care of their voice?
The most valuable thing, drink plenty of water.
Yeah, hydration.
Yeah, I can't think of anything more important. I must admit, I am not the best person at it. It's, I probably should take more notice of myself. But if you're going to single out one thing, it is you need to be well hydrated.
Definitely, because it will make all the difference for everything else. Yeah, that makes complete sense.
And it's just something you have control over. I mean, sometimes we can't control our stress and anxiety levels. We can't control our environment all the time. But most of the time, by and large, we can control that.
I'm fascinated to ask you more about those developments in the technological advancement, actually. The instruments that are used these days...
Yeah, the cameras have got better. This time last year at Wythenshawe, we just invested in 2 brand new pieces of kit. So complete brand new strobe systems, just at the same time as COVID hit, and we had to close everything down.
Oh.
But we've used the system since, and the cameras are better. The visuals are better. The images are better. There are various different types of lighting you can get these days. Those things are probably more important for diagnostics. So if you're looking for lesions or you're looking for increased blood flow or something, they're not as important if you're looking at gesture.
Yes.
But even so, from a diagnostic multidisciplinary clinic point of view, yes, there are, and I'm sure will continue to be advancements. I'm actually still a big fan of what's called a rigid endoscopy, where it's not like the mirror that they used to use and that was reflected onto the headlight. This is actually a rigid camera that goes into the mouth, and it is limited. I mean, you can't do with your voice what you would do with a fibre optic one because it's going through your mouth, but it gives an incredibly magnified view of the vocal folds, and it's really brilliant for spotting small lesions, and it's great for looking at the mucosal wave in huge depth. And I'm a little concerned that the skill of doing those examinations is going out the window, because as the fibre optic examinations are better and better and the images are better and better, people are sort of using that exclusively. But I still think there's room, personally, it's a bit of a bugbear of mine, I still think there's room for using these rigid examinations. I think they do give an incredibly good view of the vocal folds in depth. But yes, the technology, not just the technology itself, but our understanding of how to use it and interpret what we're seeing. Because an examination's fine, but it's only as good as your interpretation of it. If you can do an examination, but if you don't know what you're looking at and you can't interpret what you're looking at, it's actually not as much use. And I think that's particularly true when it comes to the singing. Often what would happen to a singer in the past is that they would be examined probably in a general ENT clinic, maybe in a voice clinic if they were lucky, and they would have a fibre optic examination, but often there was nothing physically abnormal to see. It would look, in fact, incredibly healthy, incredibly normal. There would be no nerve damage, and because that's not what the problem is. It's often the problem is incredibly subtle and specific. So it's only from learning to interpret what you're looking at and having lots of experience and saying, that's where that very specific problem is. But you can really give the singers the answers to the questions they need.
Definitely. Well, also, I was speaking with Carrie Underwood on the podcast months ago now, it was last year now. She had a really cool way of explaining, because she had done a lot of MRI stuff with the larynx to try and see more of what's going on. And of course, she explained that whatever view you get in all the apparatus we have, you never get the full story when it comes to voice. And that's one of the reasons it's so difficult sometimes to see. But obviously with things like the cameras getting better, and like you're saying, this rigid one giving you a much, much clearer image, something that could have been missed on perhaps one of the fibre optics, perhaps it wouldn't have seen so much detail. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So sometimes, I mean, even though the fibre optics are brilliant, I mean, they're far better than they used to be. They are really great. But still, sometimes, in my view, the rigid will give you, because it gives you a hugely magnified view of the vocal folds themselves. Yeah. With the stroboscopy on, you get the mucosal web going through. If you're looking for something small, it is another. We wouldn't do it for every patient by any means, but sometimes I just think I really want to do a rigid now because it will just give me that extra information. And I think that, and I totally agree with Carrie. And anything you do, it's not only it doesn't give you a full picture, it's still only a snapshot in time.
Yes.
When you're on that one occasion, and you could do it a week later, and it could be different. I once had a lady many years ago, it was now, and she was a singer. She was having problems with her voice, and we did examine her. And then she was going, I think she was going on a cruise ship, and she learned the technique, and I may have even shown you this on the course a few years ago, of sticking her iPhone in the back of her mouth and to get a picture of her vocal folds. I don't know how she did it. So on consecutive days or every few days or whatever, she would take these pictures with her iPhone. And then when she came to the clinic after the cruise trip, she showed us the different images. And it was really quite interesting to see how some days she would clearly have a lesion on the medial edge of the vocal folds. And then after a few days rest, and she took another picture, it would go. That was another light bulb moment for me. I thought, oh, hang on a minute. So I might see her on X day and I might see this. But what if I examined her a week later? It might be completely different. So, it's any laryngeal examination is only a snapshot.
Just that moment in time. Yeah, that's incredible.
So, it's important that we are careful, I think, when we're making these diagnoses. Often if we've sort of had a diagnosis with somebody and then it's a bit of a gap till their operation, say we have listed them or something, we would want to examine them again. Yes. Just to make sure things haven't changed.
Absolutely. So there are some things that the body will spontaneously heal, given the right circumstances. But in other circumstances, medical intervention, very important. And you can get that person back to full vocal health. Absolutely, yeah. Going back to sort of when I started to develop an interest in examining the singing voice, like you alluded to before, I had previously sung myself a lot, but I hadn't by that time. I'd been bringing children and doing master's degrees and various other things. A light bulb moment for me was Kim Chandler came over. She was in London at the time. I think she came up and she came in as part of a research project. And of course, Kim is a belty singer. She's very rock and pop, and Kim was about a lot when she sings, isn't she? And I was quite keen to see what would happen on the inside of her larynx. And Kim, being Kim, really wasn't very good at keeping still when we were doing these examinations. And I think one of the things I learned, and this is probably going back about 15 years, maybe even slightly more, is just how much in a singer like Kim, a rock and pop singer, just how much movement there is in the larynx. I think going back to when I first started with voice, I just see when you sang that everything just stayed in one place and they just store beautifully open all the time, and that's just nonsense. And then I think there was a lot of talk probably 20 years ago, about how the healthy way to sing was with a very stable larynx, and it was very unhealthy, with distortion was unhealthy, all these sorts of things. And what we began to see by looking at all these different types of singers, and particularly people like Kim, is it's not healthy at all. It's the way you do it. Can't get out of singing with distortion or with a lot of constriction or with a lot of movement in the larynx. If you can't get out of that can be a problem. But listening and watching and seeing just how much movement there was, I learned a lot from that. And watching different styles. So, and now it's very easy for me to see
a rock singer will use their larynx very, very differently to a musical theatre singer, for example, or a folk singer or a jazz singer. And I find all that absolutely fascinating.
Me too.
I love watching them.
The first larynx I got to see was my own. In terms I had a scope back in, I think it was 2007. And that was one of the catalysts for me going into teaching and learning about all this stuff, because I was so fascinated. As a singer, I was suddenly like, wow, I didn't know my bits and pieces looked like that. And I had a private consultation years ago, but there was a big screen. So what was being shown on there was also, I could see what was happening. And I was suddenly going, there's nothing open in there. We know when you've been told as a singer, you've got to feel all open. I'm like, there's nothing open in there. Literally, as we're making sound, the vocal folds close and vibrate. So I was just blown away. And that's what started my passion into understanding the nitty-gritty of what that's all about. I think the Estill course, in terms of vocal production, that was a starter for me. I think we know it's not a finished product, No,
I think it's quite interesting, because before I did Estill, actually, I did a course called Voicecraft with Alison Bagnall, Alison died many, many years ago. Alison was initially, I think she was a product of Joe Estill's team course or whatever, and she went off and kind of interpreted things slightly differently, and then sold her own model, this trademark, this Voicecraft thing. I did 2 of Alison's courses on Voicecraft first, and again, another Lightbulb moment. I mean, learned so much, and again, did the Estill actual course later. It enhanced our understanding of how the voice is produced enormously, and I think it's been very positive. But I worked with Charlotte Jerry on a course, 2019 must have been, in Manchester, and I kind of did the therapy side of it, and she did the Estill side of it, and it was kind of meant for speech therapists, meant to be vocal rehabilitation sort of stuff. And in fact, so she would sort of present the theory bit, and then I would talk about how you would use that therapeutically. So we tried to make it have a very, very practical application. To me, that worked really well, because it wasn't just, these are the figures, this is what you do. It was, these are the figures, this is how you do it, and this is how you use it in a therapy session.
That makes so much sense.
I think the people who went on the course found that helpful, and I certainly, putting it together with Charlotte, found it a very helpful way of looking at things. So I think that's been a major contributor as well. Yeah,
absolutely. A brilliant work. Some of that is incredibly useful in lots of ways. But it's how you interpret things, isn't it? It really is important that you don't. I think some people can get really bogged down on, this is a recipe of this is how things are supposed to happen, and then get too bound up in trying to do things that really shouldn't be concerning somebody in a moment of singing or performing, right?
And I think, yes, I totally agree. And I've seen a few singers come in to the clinic, and they've done the course, and they are so wrapped up in how their voice is being, even to the level of, well, when I do this, I think my originals are doing that, or when I do that, I think this is happening. And what's ended up with each of these, and I've probably seen about 4 or 5 people who've done this, one as young as 18, actually.
Wow.
And they've lost their love of singing. And what's happened is the emotion has gone out of their performance. Because they're so busy thinking about, how on earth they can imagine where their originals are. I have no idea, because I don't know where mine are when I'm talking or singing. But they've analysed their singing voice to such a degree that there is no joy left.
Yes.
And I've been saying to them, forget. Don't think we've checked you. Yeah, it's all absolutely fine. But it's very tense and very tight, because you're overthinking it, you're over-analysing it, and you've forgotten, how to connect with what you're doing, and I suppose with their audience as well.
Yeah.
And that's not going to come across very well.
Of course not. And in that's a big part of my work in that, and trying to get that across in the podcast and in how I work, is emotion is massively a part of communicating whatever you're communicating. We're not just different parts moving, we're body, mind and spirit.
I think that is so true. And I've noticed, I've belonged to a community choir now for a few years, and unfortunately, we've all had to go on Zoom, haven't we, over the last 12 months. But and the lady who leads our choir, Liz, she's absolutely brilliant. And she does great warm-ups, and she's great with technique, and leads quite a big choir. So we do quite a bit of work on technique, but it's not actually for me until we stop doing that and we just get up and sing whatever it is, and or we're doing a charity performance or whatever, that I really enjoy it as much. That's the bit, because that's the bit where you're connecting with other people. And I tend to forget about the technique at that point. So, yes, you've got to do technique, but then at a certain point, you've got to let that go.
Absolutely.
And just get on and perform.
It's a shame, I think, sometimes. It's almost like, I know some people talk about going down the Estill wormhole, or sort of going down the technique wormhole, and it all becoming very, moving parts rather than connection. But that connection is massively important, isn't it, with communication?
Absolutely. And I mean, I only perform in the community choir myself, but you can see it. I mean, with performers, whether you're watching them on stage or on the screen or whatever, I mean, just some people have it, and they do connect with their audience, probably even more so on stage, in fact. And you can just see there's that extra special something.
Can you remember any extra special performances that have given you that goosebump moment?
The first time I went to see Wicked, I actually can't remember the performance. It might have been Kerry Ellis. And the first time I actually heard it on stage, Defying Gravity, I heard that for the first time on stage, and I thought, I just can't believe what I'm hearing. It's probably why I've been back to see it about another 5 times, I think. So, yeah, there was that which just gave me absolute goosebumps. So, yeah, I think that's probably my defining moment.
Excellent. That's a great one. I'll put a link to Defying Gravity. I know there's a few older Idina Menzel ones from Broadway on YouTube, but
I think I could listen to Idina Menzel all day, every day, but I've never actually seen her before. I'd love to. She's got such a different voice to so many other singers. She's got, an edge to it. I'd love to examine her larynx.
Yes, wouldn't that be cool? We could just go bring it to the UK. Let's have a look.
That's something to do. I'd just like to have a look at your larynx, see what you do. I think she's got this fascinating voice, and I'd love to know how she produces that.
Yes. I mean, it's funny. I was lucky enough to see her once in London when she came over, and she was in Rent. So she'd been doing Rent on Broadway, and Rent, when it came to London, was my obsession at the time in the early 90s when I was at drama school. Would that be something anyone could tempt you into, Sue, in the future? You know, sort of sideline hustle of getting into a show, you know, locally, or?
I don't think so. I mean, despite having, you know, done some solo work in my teens and early 20s, no, I don't think so. I'm at my best in the chorus. I'm very happy in the choir that I'm in, and, you know, doing what we do. But over the past year, whilst we've been doing this Zoom virtual choir stuff, Liz, our choir leader, has been very keen on us recording stuff and then sort of sending it in, and then it's all been edited, and it's all for charity videos and so on. And she's done 4 or 5 brilliant ones. I've felt that incredibly pressurizing, because it's like being a solo artist, recording yourself in, you know, on your iPad or your iPhone or whatever, to a backing track. And none of us are used to doing this. So I did do a couple of them felt incredibly stressed and pressurized. So no, I don't think that's really me. I'm fine teaching and presenting on my specialist subjects. That's terrific. But when it comes to singing, I am now definitely a chorus girl.
That's all good, though. It's a great, fun place to be, isn't it? And
yeah, it's a great place to be.
What are your favourite numbers with your choir? And can we link to them? Can we put a little? Yeah.
So it's the Do Your Thing.
The Do Your Things.
Yeah, do your DYT Choir, Do Your Thing Choir. They're on YouTube at the moment. Actually, there's the last one they did, which I wasn't involved in, was Seasons of Love.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah.
Which was kind of done as it's a year since COVID, so it was not to celebrate exactly, it was to recognise a year since the onset of COVID. So that was that one. And then we did Proud. We did that that was the first sort of virtual one we did, which I did participate in. That's on YouTube as well. And so, yeah, there are various ones with the choir, and choir songs that I love. Well, the new one, actually, that we're just about to start, apparently we're going to do one of my favourite songs of all time, which is Let the River Run from Working Girl, the film.
Ooh.
And we do This Is Me from The Greatest Showman, which again...
Oh, I bet that's so cool. And is it like a big bunch of like women just singing it out? Oh, love it. Love it.
There are a few men in the choir, but not very many. We're mostly ladies. So, yeah, that's another one of my favourites.
Oh, fantastic. Brilliant song. So, yeah, I mean, that brightness of your energy, loving ABBA, show tunes, the drama, it's nice to see that that's going on inside of someone that's also really clever and academic and can do clever things with machines. I love meeting people because sometimes clever people can be a little dry, Sue. Come on, admit it.
Right.
She's an ABBA party girl, really. It's all good.
Oh, I love a bit of ABBA. I think if you, a Christmas party, anything the thing that will definitely get me on the floor is ABBA. Yeah,
fantastic.
But yeah.
That's amazing. Have you got a favourite ABBA tune?
On a slightly sour, The Winner Takes It All probably is my favourite. But, on an upbeat, if you're going to go for an upbeat number, it's got to be Dancing Queen. Oh, yeah. Waterloo. I mean, you can't get much more upbeat in the Waterloo.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's so much fun. I'm going to link to all these songs, so when people get to the end of the episode, they can go and have a little ABBA party at the end. That'd be super cool.
On a personal note, we're just in the middle of doing up a property in the Lake District, which we bought as a sort of a holiday let, and we've got one in Cornwall as well. So we're spending quite a lot of time. Well, now that the lockdown's eased, we can actually go up and sort of do those. So I'm doing that for a little while, but then in the next few months, I hope to outline the second edition of my book that you held up before. Yes. So I'm very much going to be the editor this time. I'm going to get colleagues to write. But there's a lot more to write since I published the book in 2016. There's a lot more to say now. We wrote the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists' new endoscopic evaluation of the larynx guidelines, which were published in March 2020, which I was the lead author for. And so there's quite a lot more to say. And of course, we're going to have to cover what you do during pandemics and personal protective equipment and all that sort of thing. So I'm hoping, to give it that sort of some time over the summer and give that some thought. So that's probably the other thing, big thing I'm planning on is the second edition of the book.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, as soon as I see anything online about that, I will share it with our community. Thank you. Make everybody aware that there's a new goodie on the shelves that we can go and pick up and support that, because it's brilliant. And, thank you again for your time today, Sue. It's been a really enjoyable conversation. And
too.
Okay, thanks, Sue.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you for joining me on the Vocal Freedom Podcast. I hope you've enjoyed the episode, and we'll move into your day with a bit more vocal freedom, feeling that you can express using your voice and let the world hear what you have to say. Visit colchestervoiceacademy.com/podcast. Sign up to be kept informed as new episodes are published, and consider joining our online community. Membership to this will allow you to post questions to our guests, link you to show notes, social media links, and entitle you to exclusive offers from our guests. See you next time.